So we're going to talk about really how this project came about, what was driving the rationale for doing this from Shell, and really what they were looking to gain from it. So why have they gone down this route to look at VR for training? I mean, lots of these will be obvious to all the people on this call. You guys understand the value from it, but you know, it's interesting to see what they kind of consider as the checklist. What was the key sort of the key ticks to get in the boxes in order to get this bought in by the wider organization. So obviously, you know, key aspect, improved effectiveness of the training, the ability to be able to repeat that training is very important. Reduce safety risk, that's an obvious one as well. You can put people in high risk scenarios, as you're all aware, and of course there is no risk. It's not exactly the same as the real world, but it's awfully close, as we know, and the level of immersion you can get from it means you can really kind of stress test your employees. A better user experience, so giving their employees better tools, a better experience when they go through that training. Once again, you know, it's an obvious benefit of using this technology. Another key one, and something that actually was called out by Shell, is obviously, you know, there's all these gains you can get, so more effective, better retention, all these things from using VR in training. But I think what's kind of key as well, as you certainly go up the sort of stakeholder tree, is, you know, bringing it down to cost as well. You know, so they're not having to, you know, bring people back to shore for training or from offshore platforms. There's clearly, you know, there's an absolute saving there. So you can take it away from the, is it more effective or, you know, X, Y, Z. Sometimes actually all it needs to be is as good, because if you can bring the costs down, what if it's as good as previous training, but there's lower cost due to using the technology? That's a massive gain as well. So that cost hook has been quite important with regard to sort of, you know, getting this bought into, as you'd expect. And the last point on there, which is arguably one of the most important, certainly I think alongside sort of effectiveness and cost reduction, is measurement. So the ability to measure what is going on in this environment, what trainees are doing. You know, our platform captures 30 data points per user per second. Everything is tracked, you know, so, and then as a customer, you work out what is of value for you to track. You know, you don't want to track absolutely everything, but you might want to track certain points through a training exercise, and you can do that with our platform. So the ability to go back to business for Shell to say, okay, here's what we've measured, here's what we've learned, here's an improvement, you know, here's, you know, increase in speed or reduction in errors, whatever it needs to be. That measurement thing is hugely important. And you know, as a company, measurement is kind of absolutely the core of everything we do, because I think some of the challenge with a lot of the solutions that are out there at the moment is having those metrics to demonstrate that it is effective or there is a return on investment. And without that, you know, we're kind of dead in the water. So it's really important to focus on that. So those are kind of the key reasons that Shell decided to look at this technology. So then how do I go about identifying the right solution and the right approach? Well, this is kind of their checklist of what it needed to deliver. So it needed to deliver a, you know, an end user experience that was the right kind of experience, the whole UX piece in here, making sure, you know, you were taking people through the steps in the right way. It made sense. It was the right levels of usability, all those sorts of things. So improving that ultimate end user experience. Also cost effective. So it's no good, you know, if you have to suddenly go and, you know, buy a whole load of hardware and there's a huge amount of maintenance around that hardware and you've got to have dedicated spaces, all these sorts of things. So, you know, it needs to be affordable. And, you know, the model we operate is there's an end user cost, amount of end users, and obviously then there's a, you know, the hardware cost as well, which, you know, looking at things like the Quest, you know, have come down dramatically when you think of where we're at with sort of, you know, HTC Vive and high-end gaming laptop and all the expense there and the complexity of having a dedicated space, all those sorts of things. So, you know, affordability was important. It needed to be an improvement on what's there now, although, as I said, you know, in some cases, as long as it's as good but has other benefits, it can be, sold into the business. They were looking for a partner who they could co-create this with. So we've created the content for Shell, although primarily we're more of a software platform provider. But in this case, we've created the content alongside Shell. We do have the ability to give customers creation tools themselves, so they can create content. Basic level of Unity is what's required, so you still do need programming skills. But it puts the power into customers' hands and means you're not beholden to an agency who can charge you excessively at times, or be unwilling to sort of make changes. So putting the power, initially it's co-creation using us, but actually what it will be moving down the track is using the platform to create the content. Scalable solution and a platform solution was key for them. I think a lot of times companies have slightly hit problems whereby they've created some content and it may well have been well received and bought into by the wider business, said, okay, let's push this out into a full rollout, and there hasn't actually been the ability to do that. So it's sort of some other talks I've done in the past is like, plan for this to be successful. Don't plan for it to be a one-off and then work out what you're going to do next. If you are going to go in and do a POC, make sure there is the ability, should it be successful, for it then to scale and roll out. Otherwise, you're going to struggle to justify why you have to completely start again or go look for another solution. So that was really important for them as well. Ability to integrate with existing systems is once again going to be key for any organization. And that's something we've done with our platform, is make sure that there is easy integration with other systems, be that an LMS or some sort of business analytics, or whatever it is, sort of standard XAPIs. The use of those means you can do it easily. So we don't want to have parallel systems. We want to have it all integrated. Security as well, incredibly important. And we have very high levels of security around all the data, anonymized data that's captured on the platform. So that was kind of the, what things needed to come out of the project and what the sort of core features, functionality, approach involved. And so what we did with Shell, this was, we started our relationship with Shell over 3 years ago. So it's a long relationship. And so we started with a proof of concept that I'll show you a screenshot from in a sec, which, the important thing there is, the proof of concept just needs to prove that it can work. I think where some organizations run into issues is they probably over-delivered the proof of concept and paid, allocated too much budget to it, meaning you come away with this beautiful proof of concept, but actually you probably over-engineered it, and may well need to sort of, that was a proof of concept, and then you move into the kind of the pilot phase, and actually that budget is just sunk budget and isn't really helping you move forward. So it's important just to take it to the level it needs to get to. It doesn't need to be all singing, all dancing. You just need to work out, what are you trying to achieve from that proof of concept? And often, as I've sort of shown here in this diagram, it's about, getting engagement. It may just be sort of winning the hearts, right? So you've got hearts and minds. You just need to get people to try it. They can see the potential for it. They understand the value that it could bring. Okay, let's move it into a pilot. And then when you get to the pilot, that's where you start needing to look a bit more at sort of tangible, okay, what are the data points coming out of it? How does it scale? How do we roll this out? So, that first piece is really important for organizations to understand what they're trying to achieve with the proof of concept. Because I think if you go into that not quite sure what you're trying to achieve, you can end up, using excessive budget that you don't need to use, and you can save for the pilot, which I think is, the way you want to be. You don't want to be burning too much budget on a proof of concept. So the proof of concept was a very simple procedure. It was tanker drivers dealing with an overspill and any kind of resultant fire. So, we created it to a good level. It's not absolutely amazing, stunning quality, because it didn't need to be, but it was good enough. And it was relatively simple. It just proved a few points. The idea being, you can get stakeholder buy-in quickly. You can show them that it's easy to use, putting on a headset, how the whole thing comes together. You can put some trainees through it and get their viewpoint and get their feedback. And then ultimately what it does is it then starts feeding the requirements that you're going to need as you move into the pilot phase. You're going to learn an absolute ton of new information coming out of a proof of concept that you then need to feed into the pilot. And so here you can see a screenshot from it. This is a driver attempting to put out the fire. There were various elements coming into it. The trainer could trigger the fire at a certain point, and they had a certain control over the environment. But once again, it was relatively straightforward, which is how it should be. And it achieved what it needs to achieve without overachieving. So we then moved into pilot phase. And in that pilot phase, there were approximately 8 procedures that were identified as use cases. I think from purging a gas tank through to handling static through to working at heights. So there are all these different requirements that came through as you move into the pilot phase, and those played out across multiple modules. As I said, I think it's around about 8, if not a few more. You then obviously bring in, as those modules become more thought through, you then bring in, okay, what are we trying to measure as part of this? What are the key points that we need to track in order to demonstrate the efficacy of that piece of training content? And what it also enabled was to actually start, there's any organization has complexity around its IT infrastructure, and Shell no different to anyone else. So actually putting the platform, rolling it out, integrating with their internal systems is also a really, really key element to consider as part of the pilot before you get to that full rollout. Pilot phase, once again, what you'll see here is the environment is relatively sparse. So this is an offshore platform, and I think this is the purging the gas tank, I think. And it's relatively straightforward. There isn't some beautiful horizon and beautiful textures on the ocean and what have you, because once again, it's more the procedure that trainee needs to go through that's important, as opposed to them being able to see a seagull soaring overhead. So it's getting it to that appropriate level that is going to mean you have an effective piece of training. And so, and where that's led us to now is we are now in full rollout. So it has been rolled out across Shell. That's been over the past sort of couple of months. Well, no, finished over the past couple of months, taking a lot longer than that. So now we are in full rollout. So I think this is an interesting example because, it's all well and good to do proof of concepts and perhaps it moves into some sort of pilot phase. But, the proof really is sort of in rolling this out. And when an organization like Shell does that, then that gives validity to the approach, because as we know, Shell aren't going to be approaching these things in anything but a really robust manner. So we're in rollout. Measurement is an interesting thing, which I'm sure you guys are thinking about. So that isn't something we have currently. So we have obviously the data is now being collected, but it isn't something that we currently have, and therefore unfortunately isn't something we can currently share. But once that comes out, and once those proof points come out across, not just for Shell, but across all the other companies who are implementing VR training, that's when I think we'll see real take up of the technology, when you have hard data from an end user saying this efficiency was achieved, or this cost saving was achieved, or this risk reduction came about, less accidents, all those sorts of things. That's when it's going to be hugely impactful. And just sort of this, just to finish on, is the sort of thing, some of the key challenges going through the process around the sort of technical versus organizational piece. So technical is the actual implementation and the hardware. Organization is more, how does the organization use this? How does it fit within the organization? So, I mean, there's sort of 4 key areas really of focus around this. And the first was like hardware, obviously, which headsets are going to be used is a key part from a technical perspective. You know, is it going to be tethered? Is it going to be untethered? You know, what are you going to be looking at that from that perspective? Also, the content piece is incredibly important, as I said before. You know, how's the content going to be created? Are you going to be using an agency? Do you want to use internal resource? And you know, what game engine, etc. What are the tools that are needed? So in that sort of still in that technical bucket. And then there's sort of distribution. So distribution of that content. How are you going to deliver it to those end users? You know, is it going to be tested fully integrated with your systems? So there's a whole organizational piece there, because you need to get IT on board, and you know, that often is or can be a relatively detailed and tricky process. So you've got to think about all those aspects, and you know, do you want test versioning, all those sorts of things. And then also coming out of it, as I've said, what is the data that's going to be captured? How's that going to be shared with the organization? How are you going to report that back to the overall organization? So all these things are sort of things that we worked through with Shell as we went through this process. And I think one of the themes that's come through is, you know, because, you know, particularly I would say, you know, VR and AR, but, you know, VR in particular, it's kind of, the term I came across recently is discontinuous innovation. So people don't have a reference point for how they're not replacing something. They're not getting a new one because the other one's broken. They don't really have that reference point for where it sits. So the challenge is engaging those stakeholders, and I'm sure, you know, a number of you guys on the call will have had that. How do you sell this in internally? And when you don't really have that reference point, it's quite a challenge. So being able to engage with stakeholders, being able to understand what their requirements are and how you can address those is absolutely key. And I think that was a really important part for the Shell team to be engaging with their organization, and for us as a supplier to also be engaging with those key stakeholders. So that stakeholder management piece, as many of you will know, but very important and often a bit of a challenge. And that's it. That is me done. That is a very quick run through of our relationship with Shell.